Hey, y'all. I am super excited to introduce our next guest for the Summer Learning Series. Today, I have the amazing Tom Mullaney joining us from, Wynwood, Pennsylvania. There we go. Steve Wynwood, Wynwood, Pennsylvania. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today, Tom. I can't wait to hear what you're going to teach me today.
I am so excited to be here, Casey. Thank you.
Can you take a moment, though, just to give everybody a little bit of information about who you are and your journey in education? And I think you kind of wanted to share a little bit of your AI journey as well.
Will do. Thank you, Casey.
Okay.
So my background is actually in special education. I started off as a middle school special education teacher in the South Bronx, wound up moving here to Pennsylvania, where I taught middle and high school special education, and then transferred over to middle and high school social studies. I then became an ed tech instructional coach and worked in different districts. I worked in North Carolina and San Francisco, now back here in Pennsylvania, and I'm a professional development consultant. I work with teachers in schools, whether here from my living room or in person, around effective, inclusive use of educational technology. Now, Casey, I don't know about your experience with generative AI. I know mine was kind of learning that this chat GPT existed, not being blown away at the opportunity for students to use chatbots. That just doesn't seem very exciting to me, but we can get into that. And then hearing experts in the field, computational linguists, talking about this stuff amplifies bias. And, I love thick tools like Figma's FigJam or Google Docs. I do a lot with Google Docs. Nobody has ever told me that just by existing, they amplify bias. So I said, okay, hold up. Let's try to learn a little bit about this. At May of 2023, I was at a meeting of consultants and I brought up some concerns I had, and it did not go over well. And so I just kept my mouth shut and kept that mouth shut. And eventually, February 2024, the dam broke, and I started writing about AI and pedagogy. And what do we know about pedagogy and what do we know about AI, actual understandings of AI, and how do those two mesh? And so that's kind of my journey with artificial intelligence.
No, I'm with you. And if any of the listeners have followed my journey in sharing, was I definitely have concerns. And my concerns almost always come back to the kids. Sorry, y'all, my cough drop is moving around in my mouth. I'm trying not to cough. Um, but the dangers and the things like that. I mean, when I see that people are quitting, and this actually happened just yesterday, I saw that someone quit working from OpenAI because they don't feel like they've got the guardrails on, and that they're not ready for these next iterations, which are coming faster and faster, right? So I just feel like when it comes to kids, whether you're a parent or a teacher or the community, that's who I'm concerned about first. But obviously there are bigger implications. But that's why I have personally been careful and taken a step back, as opposed to a lot of my colleagues. I didn't want to rush it. I'm like, y'all, if you wait 5 seconds, there's going to be 20 million other things that are already and made for kids to use. I know it's not going anywhere. I'm not ignoring it. I'm just being cautiously optimistic as much as I can with it. And that's why I was excited that you wanted to deliver this session and really just kind of set the stage for some people who don't know exactly what we're talking about, other than understanding AI stands for artificial intelligence, and there are these bots that we can chat with now. Um, Hopefully, we're not going to have any her experiences. I'm seeing more of that too. Crazy stuff, but giving us this background knowledge that I feel we need before we move on. Like, it's not just awareness; it's about that background knowledge. So take it from here, Tom.
Understood. And of course, the whistleblower is it's almost becoming a trope now in AI. It happened at Microsoft with Designer. It's now
Mm-hmm.
happening at OpenAI. And the one thing I'll just say, Casey, before I get into my intro, is the most recent iteration of ChatGPT released more than a year ago. So sometimes we're told this is, growing and advancing at a breakneck pace. Is it really? But anyway, let's get into the intro. So understand. So what you just stole my intro. Thank you, Casey. Before teachers and institutions of education get into this stuff, they should have an understanding of AI and understanding of what it is, even divorced, dare I say, from the pedagogical implications. I'm all about the pedagogical implications. And if we just go into it with it's AI, it's new, it's neat, it's innovative, therefore it will enhance pedagogy, then we're going to make mistakes. And actually, let's talk about that for a second. So what happens when we make assumptions? So Casey, and I know you're in Texas, and Texas is a hotbed of veganism and not eating meat. I understand that. But what I want to say is, what if I was thinking, hey, I want to go vegan. I hear it's good for me, it's good for the planet, but my knowledge is incomplete. Let's talk about some implications with that limited knowledge, some assumptions I can make. So, for example, if my diet is exclusively vegan, chocolate cake is seen here, potato chips and Coca-Cola, then that diet is healthy because it's vegan. Let's do another one. So milk and cheese are vegan because neither is an animal, right? Another one. A vegan diet is healthy for me, so it must be healthy for my cat, right? And I'll just do one more ridiculous assumption that you would make with incomplete knowledge of veganism. I can eat plastic because it's vegan. So imagine you do all of these things, right? So one, you're not actually going to be vegan because you eat milk and cheese. You might have type 2 diabetes because you're just eating cake and potato chips and drinking Coke all the time. You've damaged your digestive system because you're eating plastic, and your cat is malnourished and possibly in jeopardy for their life because you're only feeding your cat vegan food. You see how you have a little bit of an understanding, but then you don't have a complete one, and it causes all sorts of problems. And that's what I think is happening with generative AI and pedagogy and education right now. We're hearing it's new technology, it's really cool, but we're not having a deep understanding of what's actually going on and how that impacts pedagogy, if that makes sense.
I completely agree. There are so many assumptions that are made about things on every side of the spectrum too, but we definitely have a need for understanding technology more than ever. I think so. We've gotten away with here's all you need to know. Click here, right click, and you'll find what you need. This is different. And this requires more training than I think everybody's really expecting. That exactly what you're doing here today. So thank you.
Awesome. All right, so let's get into the actual terms, and I'll just read them off real quick. So AI, notice it's in quotes. Generative AI, salami. What are we talking? What? This guy's all over the place. He's talking about veganism, now salami. Better terms for AI, intelligence, the ELIZA effect, a large language model. And then on my other column, I got create versus generate, stochastic parrots. Again, what are we talking? Are we going to San Francisco and seeing, anyway, hallucinations, scrape or scraping. I guess it's two forms of it. Harms, the word predict, and then one that goes together, AGI and singularity. Casey, are you familiar with that one?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. All right. I'll have some things to say.
I'll let you take it, but yes.
All right. So let's talk. And I don't know that I shared my sound. So I don't know if I can play this video or not. But I can explain what this is. So this is Dr. Emily M. Bender. She's a computational linguist at the University of Washington, brilliant scholar. She puts out a lot of research, and she talks about how AI is a marketing term. It's not a scientific or technical term in any way. It's really not artificial. It's really not intelligent. And she has a great quote here that she thinks that AI is unhelpful because it's a wishful mnemonic. When the creator of a computer program names a function after what they wished it was doing rather than what it's actually doing, right? So it would be amazing if this stuff was intelligent. That's an aspiration that we have. It's not the current state of affairs, if that makes sense. All right, so let's talk about generative AI, because you and I know, Casey, as before our session, my Google Home was having some fun. That's AI. Google Maps, AI. Grammarly. Do you use Grammarly as much as I do, Casey?
I do.
Grammarly is always yelling at me for my passive voice, for my overuse of adverbs. I use that all the time. That's AI, right? But we're talking about generative AI. And we talk about generative AI, it's AI that responds to prompts to generate images, text, audio, or video from its training data sets. Dr. Gary Marcus has a great quote about that. So generative AI systems have always tried to use statistics as a proxy for deeper understanding. It doesn't entirely work, right? It's basically a predictive model. It's using patterns that it's established through its massive training data to predict the next word or characters or the next string of text. So let's get into what salami is. What is salami? Salami stands for systematic approaches to learning algorithms and machine inferences. So this is from a computer scientist, and he was a former member of the Italian Parliament, Stefano Quintarelli. And Quintarelli says that if we call it that, it makes it a little easier to see how ridiculous some of the claims are. So replace the words AI when you ask a question with salami and ask yourself, will salami have emotions? Can salami acquire a personality similar to humans? Will salami ultimately overcome human limitations and develop a self superior to humans? And could you possibly fall in love with a salami? If we term it like that, we kind of see that some of the things that people are claiming about AI and what the future of AI might be seem a little silly, if that makes sense.
Although,
yeah, go ahead.
Did you hear the lawsuit that's now coming from Scarlett Johansson?
Exactly right. And so when we're filming this, Scarlett Johansson has just said that, look, OpenAI reached out to me and said, hey, do you want, we'd like to use your voice to be the voice of our new assistant in ChatGPT 4.0. She said no. They even reached back out to her. She said no again. And then they basically went and did it anyway. And Sam Altman, the CEO, tweeted out her the day they did it, clearly making a connection with that film. And by the Casey, did you see her in theaters?
I did. It creeped me out.
So did you watch her and think, wouldn't it be wonderful if that was our future?
No.
Nor did
Never.
I. I don't anyway. Okay. So let's talk
Sorry,
about
I got you off track.
No. It's all very germane. And actually, when we get to harms, that Scarlett Johansson thing is so relevant. Better terms for AI. And these come from Quintarelli, but also Dr. Emily Bender. Salami, automation. Automation's a great one. Automation's a great one, especially, if you're looking at like a spreadsheet and you're trying to figure out what functions and you're taking tedious work and applying AI to it, which might be a pretty decent use case. Automation, very good there. Pattern recognition, and then one, synthetic media extruding machines. So all of your large language models, all of your image generative models, to me, fall under that synthetic media extruding machines, right? It's not
That's
something that was. It is a mouthful. I agree. It's just more precise, and you're going to see language is always evolving, and so being the grammar police is typically not a good thing. It's not a very inclusive thing to do with students. When we talk about AI, you have to be the grammar police because otherwise, what happens is there's big misunderstandings that occur. All right. So, and Casey, feel free if you don't feel this way about intelligence or if you have, let me know. But so I just took the definition from the dictionary. So ability to learn or understand to deal with new or trying situations, ability to apply knowledge to manipulate one's environment or think abstractly as measured by objective criteria such as tests. And so Dr. Bender says that ChatGPT is marketed as an information access system, but it's not effective for that purpose. You might as well be asking questions of a magic 8-ball for all the connection to reality or understanding that it has. I hope, does that make sense?
Yeah, I get where they're going with it.
Yeah. And so I often hear use ChatGPT as a thought partner. And my response, and so this is a pedagogical concern. So we're taking what the experts say and we're marrying it with pedagogy, right? A thought partner, that's like a pedagogical approach. I don't want a thought partner that's in league with an magic 8-ball for its connection to reality. I want a thought partner that has context, understanding, awareness. That's what I want in a thought partner. So let's talk more about intelligence. So and this is me kind of synthesizing what I see other people saying. So again, feel free to push back. So humans have it. So do animals. This is my cat, Fred. And if you're listening on a podcast, you don't see this is an amazing picture of Fred. He's attacking his rainbow string toy. He looks like he's at the very climax of a bender, maybe a catnip bender, who knows? But he doesn't look like he has intelligence, but he totally does. He knows the sound of me getting the food bag out. He knows that if he wants my attention, he'll rub his wet nose up against my leg, and then I have to drop everything. He knows if a door is closed, he's going to cry like a baby, right? He knows his sister, his mama, his daddy. He knows these things. He has intelligence. Computers don't have intelligence. And AI does not. I like to say that Fred, for all his chaos, is infinitely smarter than ChatGPT because he actually has intelligence. All right, so let's get into the Eliza effect. So I'm going to try to do this as quick as I can here. This could take a long time. There was a computer scientist, his name is Joseph Weissenbaum. In the 1960s, he created a chatbot. The chatbot was meant to be a therapy chatbot because all it really could do is repeat back what people typed in, like a therapist sometimes does. And Weissenbaum named the chatbot for Eliza Doolittle. And Weissenbaum noticed that people intuited human characteristics such as judgment and knowledge onto this chatbot. And later researchers coined the term Eliza effect. It's a tendency to project human characteristics onto computers that generate text. And so when I hear people say use ChatGPT as a thought partner or ask ChatGPT what it thinks, that is classic Eliza effect. Now, the problem pedagogically is you have that Eliza effect where humans, all humans, have this tendency to believe what computer or text generating computers generate. You mix that in with the bias and you mix that in with the inaccuracy, and then we have a pedagogical nightmare. Do you know anyone who believes something that's incorrect that they read on the internet? Right. And so this applies to students interacting with chatbots. When you have a student facing AI chatbot situation, you are coming up against the Eliza effect. We're all coming up against it when we work with the ChatGPT. But again, pedagogical concerns, it's a real thing.
We obviously come up against it in everything that we do. I mean, like you said, anything on the internet can come up and say something. Have heard a lot about, and I think it's in Snapchat. I'm not on Snapchat, but one of the bots that they installed there that children are now interacting with, and again, they're projecting a human characteristic, this exact effect that you're talking about, and what it, that's a side note of what some of these other social aspects are doing to our students and our children. But, where do we draw the line? Because you and I might also chat here in there and knowing that, but, really just how do we teach kids about this? Because the devil's advocate on this is going to say, well, that's our opportunity now to teach them how to decipher what's being said. The same thing with going through a Google search. So how do you answer that question?
Well, Casey, let me ask you this. Let's say you have a classroom, say, full of like 8, 9, 10-year-olds, and you're really concerned about what their future on TikTok is going to be. Would you say, all right, everybody, register for TikTok accounts so that we can get in there and play with it, right? Would you have them do that? Would you have had, you're right. Would you have had students register and create Twitter and Instagram accounts in 2010, right? I think that if we're teaching digital citizenship, and most importantly, we're teaching critical thinking, and I understand critical thinking is a very hard skill to come by. Don't get me wrong. But if those are working, then wouldn't there be some transfer? And if those aren't working, then let's revisit that. There's so much digital citizenship stuff out there right now. Let's have an honest conversation about whether what we're doing is working or not. what makes us think that, and then what are our next steps after that. And there's so much out there that isn't really in the K-12 conversation right now about concerns about AI that our kids could be reading, that, evaluating, critiquing before they ever touch a chatbot. That's just, a little thought there. I'm about to talk about large language models specifically, but it's the reason we think that these things are human is because we associate language with humanity. So if you're familiar with these image designers, like a Microsoft designer or DALL-E, there's no Eliza effect there. Nobody thinks that DALL-E or Microsoft designer is human because they don't generate language, they generate images. So it's kind of like we
Okay.
know,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so the difference is also whether you're pursuing to find something is going to imitate human, whether you encounter it by accident.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
very true. Yeah, I know. It is. It's language is what we hear and see language. We think humanity. I mean, think about our cats can't do language. We don't think of them as human. But once we see language, there's that tendency to say, okay, humanity. So large language model, go with the common sense media definition. Large language models are sophisticated computer programs that are designed to generate human-like text. The key word is generate, right? They generate text from data sets based on algorithms and user prompts. They predict the next string of characters. They don't create, they don't write, they generate. But Casey, have you had a chance, speaking of common sense media, have you had a chance to look at common sense media's reviews of, what's now Gemini? It's called Bard in fall of 2023 when they reviewed it, and ChatGPT?
No, I haven't read the reviews.
Take a look, because if
Okay.
it was any other app, if it was Tom's EdTech app, and it talked about bias, spreading misinformation, the attempts to counter it are feeble. That's what they say. They say, OpenAI's attempts to counter misinformation and bias are feeble. It's scathing, but it doesn't. That, for whatever reason, doesn't seem to matter. All right. It's time for me to be the grammar upholders of grammar is more important than anything. When we talk about this stuff, especially with children, the language is essential. So I always like to say create is something humans do. Generate is something that LLMs, salami, synthetic media, extruding machines do. I always try my best to not say ChatGPT says. I always try to say something like ChatGPT generates text that makes sense or generates errors. It's difficult. It's not easy, but I'd ask you to try to use that create versus generate, humans versus technology kind of thing.
Do you think we're going to need a language for describing when we don't know? Because so much is coming at us these days that we don't know where it's coming from or who generated it or said it. Do you think we need some common language to indicate that?
Well, I mean, a part of it is transparency about if you generate something with a large language model or generate an image with an image generator, that you should be transparent about that. There should be some sort of disclaimer or something very obvious to the reader or viewer that this is synthetic content. That's one thing I would say. I think we start with that, and the answer is I don't know, Casey. I think that's a really good question. A lot of this stuff, it's more questions than answers. All right, so let's get into Paris. And so earlier I was talking about San Francisco. There's an amazing documentary from the early zeros called "The Wild Parrots of Telegraph Hill." If it's not widely available, but I saw it in the theater. It's amazing. But what we mean by stochastic is random and determined by random probabilistic distribution. So Dr. Bender coined it. It's an entity for haphazardly stitching together sequences of linguistic forms according to probabilistic information about how they combine, but without any reference to meaning. And a big thing with that is that LLMs are amazing at word form. Word form, 100%. Word meaning, 0. All the meaning is on our side. We look at it and we decide if it's correct, if it's incorrect, if it means anything, or is gibberish. That comes on our side. And that comes from something called the Stochastic Parrots paper. The co-authors include Dr. Bender, Dr. Timney Gebru, Dr. Margaret Mitchell, and a few others. And it talks about large language models, about how they amplify bias and environmental racism, and gets into how they work, the stochastic parrot idea. I will say that if you've had Intro to AI PD that does not reference the stochastic parrots papers released in late 2020, go back to the drawing board. That should absolutely be at the core of anything you teach teachers about AI, for sure. Stochastic parrots. All right. So, Casey, you know the term hallucination, right? This is it's the common sense calls it. It's the widely accepted term, an informal term used to describe false content or claims that are often output by generative AI tools. I'm going to say, Tom Mullaney opinion, it's a problematic term. One, I don't really want to talk about hallucinations and say that I'm being sensitive to mental health in any way, because that those two don't go together. A better term should be developed. Two, when we say hallucination, that makes it sound like the large language model is going off and autonomously making a mistake or autonomously misbehaving. No, it's not doing anything different than when it generates text that you and I think makes sense. So what the word hallucination kind of gives LLMs more of an aura of power and intelligence or autonomy, and it takes the companies behind the large language models off the hook. It's not their fault. The LLM hallucinated, right? So that's hallucination. They really need to come up with a better term for it. And just, I would say, understand the issues that come with that's a very loaded term. That's how I'll put it. All right, scrape or scraping. This is Scarlett Johansson right here. You know what? So what happened with Scarlett Johansson is technically not scraping, but it's taking her likeness and using it for your own purposes. So we talked about these data sets, right? Well, what if the data sets include newspaper articles and books and photographs for image generators, or for audio or music generators, songs? What's happened? People put out creative work. I've written a blog. Casey, I know you've written a blog. Casey, I'm going to tell you right now, each and everything you've ever put on your blog is somewhere in a data set that's been used to train AI, both for the text, for LLMs, and for the images. Casey, unless I'm wrong, no one ever called, emailed, and said, hey, Casey Bell, we'd like to use shakeuplearning.com in our data set. We're going to use it to train a model. And, how much would you like to be compensated? Let's negotiate something here. That never happened. And that's what we're talking about. And there's a word for that. It's a Wordle word. Theft. Yeah, that's 5 letters. When we're looking at data sets that don't have consent and compensation, that's theft. That's why I put Mr. Burns there, because he's, shady, unethical practices. There is an AI app from our friends at Google that actually is the opposite of this. It is total consent and compensation and total transparent data. Casey, do you know which app I'm talking about?
No, what is it called?
It's not going to blow your mind or fundamentally change pedagogy, but it's a fun, useful classroom tool. It's called autodraw.com.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
On autodraw.com, when you click that 3-line veggie burger menu, you see artists and you see each artist's name and you see each little graphic that they've contributed. So you have full transparency and full consent. I think I might actually have a slide about it. No, I don't know. I don't think I have a slide about that. But the point is that when data is scraped, theft is occurring. The New York Times is right now suing. They were able to basically regenerate an article they published in 2019 about New York City's taxi cab industry. There's a great example in Midjourney, the Afghan girl cover from National Geographic, a very fraught image, but we'll get past that for a second. And Midjourney is able to just replicate it when you prompt for average woman of Afghanistan or Afghan girl. That seems like there's plagiarism happening there. Anyway,
yeah. There's several of those big media outlets who are suing and who have made agreements that they can't be used anymore. But you're right. I mean, this is something I'm concerned with as a creator, as an author who's already had stuff stolen. I mean, you can go on Amazon and find people who have taken my books and
Mhm.
other people's books, and they're now, they are just throwing them into AI to change the words around and stealing it. Here's something that's interesting, and talking about digital citizenship. One of the things that I have taught for years is to Google yourself. Go see what's out there about you. And if kids do that, they might see that even before they were born, their mom was sharing pictures of the pregnancy or blogging or even about it, or whatever it is, and that type of thing. But I was like, okay, ChatGPT came out. I'm showing it to my dad, who was 81 at the time, and my sister. And I was like, here, and I showed him, I'm like, you know what? Let's see what he knows about my dad. My dad, who barely has ever put any kind of information online, right? Um, it was scary how much it knew about my family history, about the drive-in my family owned, all kind. I mean, like, it went into deep stuff, and it was pretty much correct. And so again, then I scared my dad, but it's kind of that same thing. And when you think about that, it's pulling that information from wherever it could find it, and the same thing, and that is definitely something that everybody needs to be aware of. But um, I know that they're trying. There are people who are trying to get some laws in place to protect creators, and I know that the actors strike, a big thing came up about that with their likeness and all that. This is, I'm afraid, not going to get better before it gets a little bit worse, and they really have to take some action on it. But I just had to share that because it was such an interesting personal experience.
We absolutely need laws passed. And one thing I will say is when you, as a teacher, put stuff on social media, if you're putting the images of the children in your school, that stuff could get into data sets. And if you're a school, and I know basically every school out there has a web, schools and school districts have websites with images of children. I, those children don't consent to being part of a training data set. And that training data, so some of those training data sets can get into the hands of bad actors as well. So this is a real, real issue for sure. All right, I'm just going to do a quick rundown of the harms of AI. And when we say harms of AI, again, I'm talking about generative AI. So they include, but are not limited to, and this could be a whole other session. So I'm just going to kind of breeze through this. Amplification of bias, I've mentioned that. Environmental racism, immense resource use. The resource uses between the electricity and the water and the land and all that for data centers. Microsoft and Google's carbon footprint is increasing, and it's rivaling and exceeding some small European countries. And can you imagine from 2020 to 2024, your carbon footprint gets worse? That's surprising. Inaccuracy, we've gone over that. Scraping or non-consensual theft of data. Worker exploitation, that's anything from ChatGPT, OpenAI paying Kenyan workers $2 an hour to edit out and filter out the worst, most traumatic imagery and words on the internet, and just all the people who are paid pennies an hour to evaluate the data sets and evaluate these large language models. There's a lot of worker exploitation, unfortunately. And so I've heard people say AI generates human-like products with little human-like intervention. That is not correct. There's a lot of humans working on this. They're just not paid very well. And misinformation and disinformation. Misinformation, I would classify as it generates some text that's incorrect. Disinformation is when bad actors use it to confuse and put out false information. All right, let's talk about predict. Now, technically, large language models are predictive models. Okay, they predict the next string of characters. That's not here. What I'm talking about here is that Merriam-Webster says to predict means to declare or indicate in advance. So you may have heard of predictions such as AI will revolutionize education, or you won't be replaced by AI, but you might be replaced by a teacher using AI. And I'll just ask real quick, is your name Marty McFly? Is your name Dr. Emmett Brown? Because predictions are not facts. They may come true, they may not. So unless you've gotten in that DeLorean and gone ahead a few years, we can always make projections. We can always anticipate. At the same time, it's speculation. Let's just be clear about that. It's speculation. And I know that, Casey, you and I are not doing this session in the metaverse. And when when I attend a comedy show, they don't accept cryptocurrency. So we've had trends and hype and things that did not come to pass. So that's all I'm saying is that
Where's my hoverboard?
Yeah, no, to this day, there's no although I will say, I think Back to the Future, I'm going to say it just ends right after Doc Brown is saved. The second and third movies and the very end of the first one don't count, but whatever. So that's just a little point I like to make to teachers. Yes, people are saying these things are going to happen. Just because people say that doesn't mean that will happen. It may not. All right. And I think so that brings us to the end. And this is a bit of a juicy topic. This is my last word. So it builds on predictions. And it's what's called AGI and singularity. This is where we're getting real. There's a reason I'm going to go over this. Teachers should know about this because it informs a lot of the hype you hear about AI. So some people think that there will come a point where computers will reach what's called AGI or singularity. What is that? AGI stands for artificial general intelligence. So a writer at MIT Technology Review says, in broad terms, AGI typically means artificial intelligence that matches or outmatches humans on a range of tasks. So singularity is this a specific moment it's dreamt of where the distinction between human and machine will collapse. Now, here's the thing. This is all theoretical. There's no proof of this. So, Dr. Bender's, it's one of these experts, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting which one, but they said these algorithms are not going to spontaneously combust into consciousness. Large language models are not going to become sentient. That's just not something that's going to happen. Chomsky says that day may come, but the first glimmers of its dawn are not represented by large language models. So the reason I bring this up is that I've talked to people who say, singularity corner, we have to be ready in education for that day where AGI will be smarter than, or artificial intelligence will be smarter than us. And what I'm going to say is that if we're looking from a scientific, rational, evidence-based perspective, that is speculation on top of speculation on top of speculation. There is no actual things that you could point to in concrete, say, yes, so that's going to happen, so then this will happen, and then that will happen. Please don't let this kind of speculation inform your policies at your educational institution. So,
and that takes me to, another important topic, which I actually have an interview scheduled the same day as we're recording this one to talk to someone who is helping schools to develop meaningful protective policies. And I think that's what schools are kind of scrambling to figure out, what to do. We kind of go back and forth between, do we block it? Do we teach it? Do we, all of these things and the different philosophies. And I think that it's a much bigger conversation than just those things. And as I wrote early on, that the problem with AI is not cheating. Like, if you think that's the thing, that's not the thing. Cheating is not our biggest issue. We have other things. We have very good things on one side, and then we have some other detrimental things on the other side that we have to consider.
I understand our audience is teachers, and we always think about our own realm. Where of course, I'm an English teacher. I'm going to think, are my students going to use this to write essays? Having established that, think back to the harms slide. If I were to go to an expert like a Dr. Tim Nagebru, Joy Balawami, Emily Bender, Gary Marcus, and say, one of the big harms is that students might use this to write term papers. They would laugh me out of the room, right? This stuff is burning through resources. It's amplifying bias. It's stealing from creatives. It's just not, I'm sorry, that even though we are in the education world, but 12 years in the classroom right here, that's just not on the same level. It's just not.
It's not.
Yeah,
And
it's
cheating has
not.
always been a problem. I mean,
Yeah.
it has gotten easier, but I mean, that takes me back to a question I wrote about so many years ago where a teacher was complaining because when they switched from PowerPoint to Google Slides, it became so much easier just to keep sharing the slides like year to year, brothers and sisters and all these things, and everybody was kind of getting it. And it was like, that's not the problem. You got to rethink how we, teach, how we deliver instruction. How do we get original work from our students when these tools exist? We have to wrap our head around that because the world has changed. We don't sit and still pull those lesson plans out of the same filing cabinet that we've been doing for 20 years and expect that they're going to work in the same way when these tools exist. So we really have to change our thinking.
Yeah. Oh, I think if your AI PD is, let's think about assessment that AI isn't really useful for. I'm down that because you're not spreading misinformation, you're not increasing misunderstandings or hype. I think that's a wonderful conversation. I'm all for that. And then one other thing I'll say, this is not really directed at the teachers. This is directed at school leadership, administration, folks in your IT. Access through your district's firewall is a privilege. We're not going to block ChatGPT because we're innovative is insufficient. It's insufficient when you look at the harms that we talked about ever so briefly. You have to come up with standards and practices around we're letting you through our firewall. That means you either coexist or don't violate our values in these ways. We have to be very, very deliberate about access through firewalls, and we have to recognize that as a privilege. I hear a lot, oh, well, if we use AI as educators, then we'll shape the future. No, no, no. Then we'll just be users and they'll be thrilled with that. If we make AI company earn access through our firewall, then we'll shape the future. So, and again, that's not in teachers' hands, that's in district leadership's hands for sure.
Yeah, I agree with that. And thank you. I know we're running out of time. You had some great insights and some great information. A lot of words that I'm sure many of us have heard and maybe didn't even know the deeper meaning behind it. So I appreciate your time today. I want to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can reach out to you if they have questions or they're looking for training for their school.
Thank you, Casey. And let me just throw my credit to Slides Carnival. I use their slides. I did change all the fonts to Lexend, my personal favorite, as you can see. But thank you, Casey. So you can reach out to me on Twitter. I still call it Twitter. When Musk was interviewed, he called it Twitter. At Tommy Mullaney with 2 L's. You can also reach out to me on my Substack. If you just Google Tom Mullaney Substack or Critical Inkling Substack, that's where I've been publishing. And because the conversation in educational technology has been exclusively dominated by AI, guess what I write about there? So I would hope fresh takes about AI and pedagogy, and I'd love to have you join me there. Thank you so much, Casey. I'm so honored to be part of this.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tom.